Hey guys, I'm here for the next deck in our deck profile series for GOAT format. This deck is called Chaos Flip Turbo. You may more commonly hear it as Chaos or Chaos Turbo. I like to call it Chaos Flip Turbo to give it the distinct name. It's definitely a turbo deck. It's very fast. It really relies on flip effect monsters, unlike most of the other turbo decks in the format. So this is a very popular deck with new players. It's fairly linear and easy to play. It almost plays like an aggro deck at times, but it also plays like a control deck because it can generate lots of card advantage. It's really just a very simple control deck. What the deck really wants to do is win with its chaos monsters. It plays as many as it can. These are really the only boss monsters in the deck. There are 3 Chaos Sorcerer and 1 Blackluster Soldier. Now, we all know Blackluster Soldier is probably the best Chaos monster in the format. It can banish any monster, regardless of its position, face down or face up. Chaos Sorcerer, on the other hand, has lower stats, and it can only banish face-up monsters. Otherwise, they both have the same effect, where they cannot attack the same turn they banish. Chaos Sorcerer is a dark, Blackluster is a light. So the key engine for this Chaos Flip Turbo deck is a combination of flip effects and Thunder Dragon. So Thunder Dragon is the main source of reliable light monsters in this deck. It also helps thin the deck very quickly. It's a level 5, 1600, 1500 monster, so it's a tribute monster with unimpressive stats. But the ability to replicate itself in your hand is pretty unique. It's a lot faster at loading the graveyard than many other cards in the format, and that's why it's chosen in this Chaos Flip Turbo deck. The deck also normally plays multiple copies of Magician of Faith and Dekoichi the Battle-Chanted Locomotive. These are probably the 2 strongest standalone light and dark flip effect monsters in the format. They don't really need that many other cards to be good. You know, Dekoichi is good pretty much at any time in the game. It's a good high stat flip effect monster that will draw 1 card when it is flipped. 1400 attack for a flip is pretty high. Magician of Faith, you all know, it gets back the power spells in the format. Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, Delinquent Duo, Heavy Storm, Nobleman of Crossout. What makes the Chaos Turbo deck unique, though, is it has a 4th Trinity piece, Card Destruction. Card Destruction has a lot of synergy with Thunder Dragon. And this is a pattern that the Chaos Flip Turbo deck looks to exploit. Because it relies on Thunder Dragon, it wants to play cards that take advantage of having multiple Thunder Dragons in your hand. But that also pushes the deck to include other cards that like to be discarded. One of those is Night Assailant, another flip effect. Night Assailant has the ability to add any flip effect monster in your graveyard back to your hand when it is sent from your hand to the graveyard, so when it's discarded primarily. So this works great if you have a Dekoichi or a Magician of Faith in your graveyard already. Finally, to round out this list, I'm playing 3 copies of Mystic Tomato, and that's really to balance the light and dark ratios. Thunder Dragon is such a reliable light, but Dekoichi the Battle-Chanted Locomotive really isn't the most reliable dark monster. It can get crossed out early in the game, and then it's going to be kind of hard to get dark monsters in the graveyard if you don't play other dark monsters aside from Sangin, Night Assailant, and Cyberjar. Some Chaos Flip Turbo lists like to play Tsukuyomi. I don't really, because I like to play like a slightly different trap lineup. I don't like to play like Sakuretsu Armors or Mirror Force. Those cards really set up your flips well and set up your Suku locks well. Since I'm not playing those, I don't think my Suk is very good. I also don't really need Suk to out TER because I'm playing 3 Chaos Sorcerer and 1 BLS, and I'm also playing 3 Book of Moon. They can help me reuse a flip effect, and then I can also get a summon. Whereas if I had Tsukuyomi, I would have to spend a normal summon. So using Book of Moon with flip effects is inherently more explosive and more friendly for the turbo shell. You'll also notice that this deck plays a very high monster count, and that's on purpose. You know, most GOAT format decks you'll see, the typical GOAT control list plays 16 monsters. This one plays 21. Cards like Thunder Dragon and Night Assailant don't really count as full monsters in my opinion. You often want to leave those in hand for your discard effects, and you don't really want to normal summon them. Finally, like the Chaos monsters themselves, they really just kind of come out of your hand very quickly. They don't cost a normal summon. So if you think about it, This monster lineup contains very few normal summons. We can kind of count them. Cyberjar, 3 Dekoichi, 3 Magician of Faith, 3 Tomato, 1 Sangan. We rarely want to summon Sinister Serpent with this list too, since we're not playing more Metamorphosis. So that's like about 10 monsters we want to normal summon, maybe 11. So really we can get away with having a very high monster count. You'll see some lists that omit discard Mystic Tomato, and I think when you do that, you're setting yourself up for a pretty volatile game. I think Mystic Tomato provides the deck with a lot of stability, and I can go over that with this replay. So often, one of the main problems you'll hear players complain about with Chaos Turbo is that it can brick. It can have really bad opening hands. I think that Mystic Tomato really helps to solve this problem, as we'll see. So we had a pretty poor hand here. We opened 2 Chaos Monsters, no way to immediately summon them. We do open with the Thunder Dragon, so that's good. We have a light source, but we don't have a reliable dark source yet. However, this variant of the deck is playing Dekoichi, like most variants, and also Mystic Tomato. Another thing you'll notice that makes this deck a little brickier in the opening game is these discard traps, and even like a spell like Card Destruction. You don't really want to use that turn 1 until you have it set up. So that can make the deck kind of awkward and slow. Mystic Tomatoes provides a lot of stability in the early game. So it allows you to do something like set your Dekoichi the Battle Chanted Locomotive without any back row to protect it. So you're totally fine if your opponent ends up using Knock on this Dekoichi. So our opponent here didn't have Nobleman Crossout, but they did have Abyss Soldier to bounce the Dekoichi. And that would be a real problem if we were only playing flip effects in this list. But since we're playing Mystic Tomato, we can normal summon it and have it fill the graveyard, and it's not really a -1 at all. It's an even exchange to fill this graveyard with all these Mystic Tomatoes and Sangans. All it costs is a little bit of damage. So we took 400 from each tomato going to the graveyard and 800 from the Sangan going to the graveyard. But now look at how good and fluid our hand is. Our Sorcerer is set up. In main phase 2, we can summon Sorcerer and banish that Abyss Soldier. And then we still have 2 more Darks in the graveyard. So we're pretty much set up with Darks for the entire game from this one Mystic Tomato. Additionally, Mystic Tomato got us to our Sangan, which is a really key monster for this deck because it searches out Sinister Serpent, and that makes all these discard traps really good, like immediately. We don't even need like another flip in the graveyard like we would with Night Assailant, and we don't have to resort to discarding our Thunder Dragons or Chaos Sorcerers because we have no other choice. We'd rather hold these cards in our hand. So this is really like quite a powerful opening 2 turns here. We're ending this turn with a live Wing Blast set, a Chaos Monster, and our opponent's on 6 cards, while we're on basically 8. 7 if you count Thunder Dragon as only 1. So the next thing I want to explain about this deck is the spell and trap lineup. As I mentioned, this deck plays Book of Moon, Card Destruction, Graceful, most of the staples. Notably missing are revival spells. There's no Premature Burial or Call of the Haunted. That's because Chaos really needs its graveyard to be full to summon the Chaos Sorcerers and the Black Luster Soldier. We want to summon Chaos Monsters from our hand, not revive them from the grave. Another thing you'll note about this list, obviously, is it does not play Scapegoat or Metamorphosis, and it does not even try to do so. There just really is not much room for those cards in the deck, and it kind of conflicts with our strategy. It just sort of leads to inconsistencies overall. Either we'll have like metas that are dead or Chaos Monsters that are dead because we're trying to get cute and play 2 of these power engines in the same deck. This is something that Chaos Control tries to do, and it really has to sort of take like a hybrid approach. Chaos Control doesn't really get away too well with running Night Assailant, and usually it only runs 2 copies of Chaos Sorcerer. These are all changes that the deck makes to compensate for being more of a control deck that's slower. It sort of waits to draw its combos with Scapegoat and Metamorphosis, and really waits till the mid to late game to use its Chaos Monsters. It's not trying to drop Chaos Monsters on turn 2. Another thing you'll notice about the spell and trap lineup is that we're playing Upstart Goblin. That's because thinning in this deck is really prominent. Tomatoes thin, Thunder Dragon's thin, even the flip effect monsters thin the deck quite a lot whenever they are hit by Nobleman of Crossout. And we don't really care if they're hit by Nobleman of Crossout because we have other light and dark engines respectively that can take their place in the graveyard to fuel our chaos monsters reliably. So when one of our flip effect monsters gets hit by Nobleman of Crossout, there's some benefit to it too. It makes our deck quality go way up. That's because card destruction and Graceful Charity really are the main win conditions for this deck, aside from the boss monsters. Card Destruction and Graceful Charity in this deck can generate +2s and +3s. Okay, so we want to get to those cards as fast as possible. There's not very many draw engines in GOAT format, so Upstart Goblin's pretty good. Another thing that Upstart Goblin does is it's a spell card, which is good for Magician of Faith, especially when we open it early in the game. Upstart Goblin gives us more consistency with Magician of Faith, and it does give us the option to set it on turn 1 quite often. Let's take a look at how Upstart Goblin works so well with all the deck thinning components in this deck in this replay. So we're going first here, and we've drawn Upstart Goblin. Now, most people might think, oh, Upstart Goblin, just use that right away to get the next best card in your deck. Not so with this deck, because we have so many ways to thin our deck, including Thunder Dragon, Mystic Tomato, and flip effect monsters that may or may not get hit by Nobleman of Crossout. I'd rather wait and play Upstart Goblin until after all of those things had an opportunity to happen. Of course, we'll start off by playing Thunder Dragon, but I'd like a chance for our flip to get crossed out too, so I'll set that to Koichi. Notice again how Mystic Tomato is a safe dark to hold in our hand while we are happy to risk to Koichi to Nobleman of Crossout. In this situation, I think we'd actually like our opponent to use Nobleman of Crossout on our Koichi. It would really improve the quality of our deck, so that we could then use Upstart Goblin. Taking 3 Koichi out of the deck and 2 Thunder Dragon out of the deck leaves us with 30 cards at the start of our next turn, which is really good for GOAT format. Most decks are starting in the mid to low 30s on their second turn. The thinning already paid off as we've drawn Delinquent Duo on our second turn rather. This is a powerful play. Because we don't really have another great spell, and because we want to give Mystic Tomato an opportunity to thin our deck even further, we can set that one instead of Magician of Faith. We don't want to get back to Delinquent Duo because our opponent happened to have Sinister Serpent. So we can wait even longer to draw a really powerful spell like Graceful Charity or Card Destruction. We'll see what our opponent does here. Looks like they've summoned Tribe. So they'll attack our Mystic Tomato. Unfortunately, we can't get another Mystic Tomato because our opponent will simply call Plant in main phase 2 and destroy it for free with that Sinister Serpent they have in their hand. So we'll get Sangan. The Sangans will crash, and we can take this opportunity to search for Sinister Serpent. Now I think at the start of our next turn will be a good time to play Upstart Goblin. Hopefully by now we'll get something good. So look at this already, we're at 26 on turn 3. So that Upstart Goblin did get a pretty good card, Nobleman of Crossout. Now we have a very strong play here to respond to our opponent. We can summon Chaos Sorcerer, banish their Tribe Infecting Virus, then go and set Magician of Faith with Knock in hand. If our opponent tries to set a monster in response to this play, we can play Knock and then flip Faith, and then add Knock back to our hand. This is a really powerful way to open the game. A lot of this is thanks to the thinning that our deck did, as well as Upstart Goblin's ability to get to our next best card after we've done a lot of our thinning. Finally, this trap lineup is pretty unique. I'm playing 4 total discard traps. I sort of came to this idea that I like to play both Phoenix Wing Blast and Raigeki Break. And I think both cards are actually really strong when you have a free discard like Night Assailant or Sinister Serpent. But, however, even though these cards are similar, they both kind of really have different cards that they interact with well and negate. For example, you really want to use Wing Blast on monsters, like a set monster. You can even use Wing Blast on a set Sanguine or a set Sinister Serpent, and it's a really good play to put that card on top of the deck. Raigeki Break, on the other hand, you sort of want to save for like the one-of power spells and traps in the format. Both of these cards, you can use Phoenix Wing Blast on spells and traps. You can use Raigeki Break on monsters. There's some flexibility there. But playing 2 copies of each, I think, gives us the most flexibility in this deck. It just gives us a lot of options in the mid and late game. Next, I'd like to talk about the cards that I'm not playing in this deck. You may realize that I'm not playing a lot of the quote-unquote staples. One staple I'm missing is Breaker the Magical Warrior. There are really 2 reasons why I don't include it in this list. First of all, I don't need it for Tribute Father. There's no Aeronite Parshat that I want to tribute, so I don't need a Floating Breaker. Second, I don't want to interact with my opponent's Book of Moon very much. Since I'm not playing Scapegoat and Metamorphosis, there are fewer things for my opponent to successfully use Book of Moon on. Why would I give them another target that they could use when they could just have dead Book of Moon set against me the entire game? Book of Moon won't really do anything against Chaos Sorcerer, Mystic Tomato, or Dakochi of the Battle Chanted Locomotive when they attack. Another card that's not in this list is Snatch Steal. Snatch Steal is kind of dead early game, and it won't really make my Faith live on turn 1. Another issue with Snatch Steal is I am not running Tsukuyomi to flip it down, and I'm not running Aeronite Parshat to tribute summon the monster I've stolen. Finally, Snatch Steal is somewhat redundant with Chaos Sorcerer. It's more face-up monster removal, which this deck has plenty of. Lastly, I'm not playing Mirror Force. That's because I'm not playing Sakuretsu Armors either. I don't think it makes much sense to keep Mirror Force in a deck when you don't want to play Sakuretsu Armor in the first place. Furthermore, our opponent doesn't necessarily know we're not playing Mirror Force, so we still get the benefits of Mirror Force existing in the format at 1. They may play around it in the duel even though we don't have it. I do like Torrential Tribute in this deck, however, since we have such quick access to Sinister Serpent through Sanguine and Mystic Tomato. Torrential Tribute is often used as a third Nobleman of Crossout too, and this deck does struggle with set monsters since it can't use Metamorphosis and Thousand Eyes Restrict to steal them. Finally, I think it's time to go over Cyberjar here. So, you'll notice about my Cyberjar is it's in a really powerful shell. It's surrounded by other monsters that I'd be happy to summon off of it. Most Goat Control decks play cards like Breaker the Magical Warrior, Tribe Infecting Virus, Tsukuyomi, and Morphing Jar that they wouldn't want to summon off of Cyberjar. So let's look at this replay to see how powerful Cyberjar can be in this Chaos Flip Turbo deck. This looks like a pretty even game state. The only problem is, my hand is sort of a brick. I haven't drawn into one of my many light monsters yet. No Thunder Dragon or Magician of Faith. Cyberjar does some of the same things that Morphing Jar does for the Goat Control deck. The reason that the Chaos Flip Turbo deck, however, does not want to play Morphing Jar necessarily is because Morphing Jar isn't very useful in situations like this where you have 2 dead Chaos monsters. You can't set those Chaos monsters before you flip your Morphing Jar, for instance. And you also can't summon them, obviously, because they're not live yet. Cyberjar works great in game states like this, where we're kind of stuck and it's even. So I'm going to set Cyberjar in a Pro Heavy Storm here. Let's see how our opponent responds. It looks like they're committing further to the board to match what we just did. That's absolutely perfect for us. Time to use that Pro Heavy. However, our opponent chains Scapegoat. One thing to note about Cyberjar is it interacts very positively with our opponent's Scapegoat. First of all, it destroys all monsters on the field, including tokens. Second of all, if Scapegoat was used on the same turn that Cyberjar is about to be used, the opponent won't be able to summon any of the monsters they pick up off the top of their deck. However, we will. So we just wiped our opponent's field. And now all 3 of these monsters that they picked up off the top of their deck that are less than level 5 will be sent to the graveyard because they're not allowed to special summon for the rest of this turn. So this Cyberjar actually generated a huge swing because we were able to use it on the turn our opponent activated Scapegoat. Even if they had not activated Scapegoat, It would still be good to force our opponent to special summon these monsters face up or face down, because we could then follow up with chaos plays and remove those monsters. So on our side, we got Thunder Dragon, which we needed for the light monster to fuel our Blackluster Soldier. We can set our Dekoichi. That works great off of Cyberjar. Pitching Thunder Dragon here and looking at our opponent's life points, I actually see an opportunity for a game shot. All we need is a second light, because we have 2 darks already. We can do this because Thunder Dragon has the ability to fail to find another Thunder Dragon in the deck. This is a GOAT format specific rule. You're allowed to use Thunder Dragon for 0, you're allowed to use Rhoda for no monster in your deck. So here we can summon 2 Chaos monsters, and then tribute summon the monster we just special summoned. We hadn't used our normal summon yet, and we can attack for game. Finally, I'd like to go over the side deck. This side deck is fairly unique, because this deck is fairly unique. First of all, I'm not really siding out any of my monsters. They're all pretty crucial to my engine. The only one I think I would side out is probably Cyberjar. There are definitely some matchups where Cyberjar isn't so good. So I was thinking I could side another flip in those matchups that I can also tutor off of Mystic Tomato in a pinch. That's Mask of Darkness. Because you're able to then play Book of Moon and use that flip immediately. This is actually especially good with Cyberjar because it has such a powerful effect. However, I think in some of the matchups that Cyberjar is weak, Mask of Darkness can be equally powerful, especially if I'm siding in cards like Solemn Judgment or Royal Decree. Royal Decree is a pretty good out to almost every back row heavy deck in the format, such as Flip Control and Burn. I also think Royal Decree can potentially be good against aggro if we don't care if they're attacking us successfully, which this deck often does not, since it runs cards like Mystic Tomato, Assailant, Sangin, etc. We do have to watch out for our opponent's flip negators, however, but we can use Book of Moon on them just fine. The cards I'm talking about are Blade Knight and Mystic Swordsman, level 2. So I think Royal Decree has a lot of potential in this shell. Notice that I'm only playing 6 traps in the main deck. It's pretty easy to side in 3 Royal Decree for these 6 traps, and then find some combination of 3 spells to fill out the remaining slots in my main deck. Against aggro in particular, I want something reliable that will kill their monsters that are threats, like Smashing Ground. Aggro tends to side in Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer against Chaos Flip Turbo decks. Smashing Ground would be great in that situation. Smashing Ground would also be great against cards like DD Assailant, Blade Knight, and King Tiger Wangu if King Tiger Wangu is a threat too. Finally, I think Lightning Vortex has some merit against aggro, as they'll often summon multiple monsters on the field, and they won't often think that Lightning Vortex will be coming. It's not a card that's commonly played in most decks of the format, especially if Royal Decree is face up. An aggro deck will have little reason not to use its normal summon every turn and swarm the field, then you can hit them with a Lightning Vortex. This deck also supports Lightning Vortex very well. We know that it supports discard cards very well. So if we take out our discard traps and put in a card like Lightning Vortex, it should work just fine. Another discard spell that's pretty unique is Back to Square One. Back to Square One is sort of like the spell version of Phoenix Wing Blast, but it can only target monsters. So in a way, it's sort of like a Nobleman of Crossout. It's also like a targeted removal. You could use this on a Kaiku as well. Next, we have Mind Control, which I think is especially strong in Chaos decks. Mind Control is so great with Chaos Sorcerer because you can activate it, and no matter what you get that's face down, you can banish it. Say, for example, you use Mind Control on an opponent's Sangin while you have a Chaos Sorcerer in the field. That normally wouldn't be so great. However, we can flip up the Sangin and banish it. Finally, I think Solemn Judgment is a pretty good pick for Alt-Win and OTK decks and combo decks, such as Dimension Fusion combo decks like Reason Gate Turbo and Dimension Fusion Turbo. It's also good against Empty Jar. This deck doesn't play Scapegoat, so having another tool like Solemn Judgment to interact with those combo decks is important. Scapegoat is actually one of the more underrated cards to use against combo decks. It can often disrupt them, even Empty Jar. So I think it's important to compensate with Solemn Judgment. Another thing that Solemn Judgment helps with is the fact that we don't play Metamorphosis, so we can't make Dark Vaulted the Terrible or Ryu Senshi. Sometimes we just need the negate effect. Finally, I have these two extra dark targets. Mask of Darkness obviously can take the place of Cyberjar and works really well with Solemn Judgment. It also worked quite well with Royal Decree. We could bring Royal Decree in against a flip control deck, for example, and we can also bring a copy of Mask. We'll pressure the flip control deck to out Royal Decree, and even if they ever do, we may be able to get it back with a Mask and ice the game. Finally, I threw in Dark Mimic level 3 in case I wanted an extra attacker that also had some synergy with Mystic Tomato. I figured it was sort of a catch-all and could replace Cyberjar in like some bad matchup that I'm not thinking about at the moment. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you guys liked the review of Chaos Flip Turbo. See you next time.